This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 378, Acquia's Drupal Acceleration Team. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Today we're talking about Acquia's Drupal Acceleration Team with Tim Plunkett. Tim has been a Drupal developer for over 14 years. Major contributions include getting views into core, thank you very much, as well as the introduction of config entities, plugins, and the object-oriented form system. Most recently, he was the co-initiative lead and primary developer of Layout Builder. Thank you again. He works remotely from Philadelphia as an engineering manager on Acquia's Drupal Acceleration Team. Tim, welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us again.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
For those of you that don't know, I am John Picozzi, a solutions architect at EPAM, and today my co-hosts are Nick Laughlin, founder of Enlightened Development. How are you, sir?
Good morning. I'm very good. Excited to talk about this.
Great to hear. Leslie Glynn is also joining us, a customer success manager at Redfin Solutions. Leslie, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me again.
Absolutely. Let's move into our module of the week. For the module of the week, we're going to bring in Martin Anderson-Klutz, a senior solutions engineer at Acquia and maintainer of a number of Drupal modules of his own. And I think he's actually going to talk about his latest creation. Martin, what do you have for us this week?
Thanks, John. Yes, this week I'm going to be talking about the key save module, which is brand new. It allows an editor or admin to save an entity or config form using Command S or Control S instead of having to sort of navigate over and click on the submit button. It's small by design, really just adds a tiny JavaScript library to simulate the click. So far, it's only being used by 2 sites, which might both actually be me. And it really came about because I was setting up a new Drupal site, going back and forth between kind of config files in my IDE and Drupal's web UI, and a couple of times had the experience of accidentally doing the Command S when I was making some changes and having to sit in frustration and watch that sort of, save dialog, scroll down over the web UI and then scroll back up once I canceled it. And started thinking maybe there's a way to at first cancel it, and then decided, well, maybe there's actually a way to make that work the way I had actually intended when I did the Control S. And so wrote a little bit of JavaScript. Thanks to the config forms or I guess object-oriented forms, it was actually pretty easy to attach that pretty widely through the site. And I've been using it for the last few days, and for me, it makes a big sort of usability improvement. It definitely makes an even bigger difference on kind of long forms like your modules forms or your permissions forms. And I think there's potentially an accessibility benefit. So instead of having to sort of like tab your way through a long form to get to the submit button, being able to do that with a keystroke. But maybe this is a good opportunity to open it up to the group. Has anybody else kind of had that experience of accidentally opening up that dialogue while working the Drupal backend?
I'd like to first suggest a module name change. Maybe instead of key save, we call it key and scroll saver.
Or content save or something. Well, the first question that comes to mind for me is, does this change the default submission behavior? Meaning, does it bring you back to the edit page and leave you there? Or does it bring you to the view page automatically as well? Because I feel like if I hit Control S when I'm working on like a node, usually it's like I'm just saving in progress. Because like if I'm using Word or something like that, like it auto saves all the time, and you I don't know, for some reason you save before you close, but usually it's like an in progress thing. You're still editing. You're making sure you're not going to lose your place. And so I'm thinking if I were to use this, it would be like I want to save the page, but I'm going to continue working. Does it do that, or does it just hit the submit button for you? And
yeah, it literally submits or simulates a click on the submit button. So as you say, it would be exactly the same as doing a full save in the sense of redirecting you
So-
based on that. There is a module that will autosave though, if that's what you want.
Yeah. So Nick, I want you over the next 24 hours to pay attention to how many pages you scroll all the way to the bottom to in order to hit the save button, and then think, hey, if I took all of that time and chained it together, it would maybe be like a whole hour of my day, right? Maybe a half hour. I don't know. But this is going to save you that time.
I appreciate the sentiment, but I use Gin admin theme, which puts the save button at the top of the page always. So I do zero scrolling. But I do have one other question for you, Martin, about this. Is how does it dedupe multiple submit buttons on a page? For example, if you're using inline entity form or something and you have multiple forms, does it just save the parent entity on the page, or does it save the nearest entity? How does it know what to do?
So what seemed to be the most reliable was actually selecting it using the data Drupal selector attribute. And based on my experience, that seems to work pretty reliably in terms of saving the parent form, but didn't seem to, accidentally trip up and submit sort of, as you say, with a nested entity form or anything like that. But, it is early days and there may be more work ahead in terms of making it more reliable. I expect that as people use it with things like paragraphs and other kinds of modules, there will probably be some more work to be done to make it work across, the thousands of Drupal modules. But certainly for basic use cases, it seems to work pretty well so far.
Great. And I really appreciate it, Martin, as somebody who supports customer sites with all different kinds of themes. Having to scroll down the bottom, especially for permissions and such, it's going to save me a lot of time. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Wait, does it work on the permissions page?
It works on the permissions page. Made sure specifically to include that one.
You have a winner there. All right.
It's great utility. And I love these type of modules that are like, if you need it on a site, you can install it, but it's not like it's not one of those ones that has like 50 different features that you don't use. It's very, very specific.
Awesome. Well, Martin, thank you for bringing us your latest creation, and let's move on to our primary topic. Okay, Tim. Can you give us, right? We're talking about about Acquia's Drupal acceleration team, and I'm going to actually start here by saying the acronym for that is DAT. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay,
it's DAT team.
DAT. Wow. All right. Well, that sounds cool and fun. So listeners, if you hear us say DAT, that's what we're referring to. But could you just give us an overview of what the Drupal acceleration team at Acquia is?
Yeah, of course. So at Acquia, there are many different engineering teams focused on very many different things, all of our products, etc. Our team is focused explicitly on accelerating Drupal itself. Mostly, originally mostly Drupal core. But lately, and I can get into this more, we found that one of the best ways to work on Drupal core is to work on Drupal contrib and then move it into core later. But the overall mission of the Drupal acceleration team, as we wrote it, was we add momentum, planning, and organization to Drupal core efforts. We ensure Drupal has a future by thinking 2 to 5 years ahead.
Oh, wow. And so what are you responsible for there? Are there any other things that we've heard about maybe in past releases?
Yeah, so I think, the original team was started in May 2011.
Okay.
And the original focus was on what was called at the time the Spark Initiative. And that was a little bit, it was mostly focused on content authoring kind of things. So that led to the inclusion of CK Editor into core the first time. Quick edit module, the toolbar module, responsive images, those kinds of things. That was the original focus of the team before I joined, in 2011, 2012, 2013-ish. And then around the time I joined Acquia, the focus was on getting Drupal 8 out the door. Drupal 8 release cycle was the longest in Drupal's history. And there was a lot of time spent by pretty much the entire team on preparing, finishing the work in core, preparing contrib for the original, initial Drupal 8 release, and work like that. then once after after Drupal 8.0 was released, work shifted back to sort of new improvements like the API first initiative that led to JSON API and many other improvements, media layouts, which led to we actually did a lot of different layout work. First, there was block place module, which most people never used. There was field layout module, which also probably many people used, and but that eventually led to the layout builder ecosystem, starting with layout API and layout discovery module, layout builder module, and then a couple of contrib modules we worked on in addition to that. And then lately we've been focused on auto updates, the automatic updates module, and project browser module, which we talked about 20 episodes ago.
So one of the things I'm curious about as you're talking through this is, it's definitely helped out by the fact that we're now in semantic versioning, right? And you can add features between cycles. Yes. Are some of those project level decisions going through the DAT as well? Like, did you have any input into like moving to semantic versioning, or was that decision already made, or is it kind of a community push?
That's an interesting question, because the DAT is made up of community members, and primarily until very recently, I think every single member of DAT was an established Drupal contributor before they joined the team. That's no longer true, and I kind of want to talk about that later. But at the time, it's just the team was home to some of the major Drupal contributors, and so while a lot of those decisions were absolutely involved those Acquians, I don't think it was because they worked at Acquia that they were involved in those discussions. So it's kind of hard to draw the line between the two, and that's actually a big part of a big struggle for us is remembering when to have conversations within our Acquia Slack versus our Drupal Slack, for the shared Drupal Slack. Like, we have our own team channels and whatnot, and it's always a push to keep everything as much as possible. Like, unless it's about the start time of the next Scrum call, we should be having these discussions in public, and we primarily do. So it really does. We have to put in the effort to keep the unblur the lines between the two, but it also takes it. It's harder if it's not something that we're working on purposefully as a team. We don't take credit for it as like, oh, this is a DAT initiative or an Acquia initiative. It's all Drupal.
Yeah, and the purpose is to push Drupal forward.
Absolutely.
It's just you can focus on that every day.
Yeah, and I mean, the team, within the team structure we have, they're engineers and they're also product managers, is what the term we use internally at Acquia. But the people like Gabor Hochi, who has coordinated the coordinators for almost every core initiative since the concept of initiatives was started. People like Angie, Webchick was the original member of this team. And she was responsible for all of that. She was a core maintainer, etc. So there's a lot of meta work that goes on too, a lot of like community advocacy, community building, mentoring, etc. that happens in addition to writing code.
Great, thank you. Speaking about Angie Webchick and the original folks that used to be on what used to be called the Office of the CTO.
Yes.
It's now called DAT, and we were just wondering what caused the name change.
Yeah, so the Office of the CTO still exists within Acquia in that it's the people that work directly under Dries. And I think the origin of it was this team that everyone thinks of as Octo. And we were just the Drupal people that worked with Dries or worked for Dries to work on Drupal all the time. I think it was 2018, so almost 4.5 years ago, the company was kind of reorganized into this concept of like engineering and product, where you needed both halves, and it was a very internal focused effort to kind of fix things for all the product teams. But at the same time, our team had been very siloed away from the rest of engineering, just working under Dries. And so we were moved under the engineering umbrella internally and split into an engineering and a product team. And so as we were moved away from Dries, we no longer reported to him. And so we were no longer the Office of the CTO because people still had those jobs. So we had to abandon our name that was well known within the community, because the first person to join was Webchick, and the second person was Moshe Weitzman. And, there was a lot of community knowledge of that team. So we had to we actually had one of our team members make up stickers that said like formerly known as Octo, like FKA Octo. We all had them on our laptops because we had to change our name. And we had, I wish I'd found the Google Doc. We had a long brainstorming session and on-site of what we could name the team. And we had some pretty ridiculous names, some more pronounceable than others. But we ended up with the Drupal Acceleration Team, mostly because we wanted to be that team. And it's just fun.
Yeah, I mean,
I love it.
If you had answered that question like, "Oh, we just wanted a better acronym," I would have been like, "Oh, yeah, that makes complete sense. That's fair."
Yep, we were removed from our old acronym, but we really just wanted a better one. Yeah.
So you've mentioned a couple of team members, both former team members and current team members, right? Just wondering how many members are on the team right now? Like, how big is that team?
7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. There are, it looks like maybe 14 engineers and 4, managers or product people. So 14 people writing code on a daily basis. But a lot of them, the team is always ever evolving. But I think about half the team has been hired since we became DAT. Like only a few people were left over from the Octo days. And then, even more recently, we've been starting to hire people who had never seen Drupal before. Because one of the biggest things is, the joke was that the day you join this team was the last day you build a Drupal site, because so few of us actually have the time or the need to work on client work. I came from the agency side and I moved here, and it's true. It was the last time I really sat down and had to build a Drupal site for someone else's needs. So we really started to lose. We always, every person that came in was the expert at what people were doing with Drupal, but their knowledge was stopped that day. But we got a lot of new people on the team that had never seen Drupal before, and seeing Drupal through their eyes has been really, really beneficial for the team. So we've continued now, like 3 years in a row, hiring people and training them up to be core contributors instead of taking core contributors and bringing them into the company.
Well, I was going to say, can you expand on that a little bit? Like, who has joined from outside of Drupal? Are they like project managers, product managers? Are they developers?
They're all developers. Yeah, they're engineers. A few of them, all of the ones I'm talking about that have never heard of Drupal before, it's their first or second job out of university. So we're taking recent college grads, usually CS majors, and this is their first job at all. And it was actually really funny. Some of them, they worked on either core or major contribute initiatives for a year, and then we were having a hackathon recently, and they said, for our hackathon, we want to build a Drupal site, which I thought sounded silly at first, and I realized, wait, this is going to be their first Drupal site. Like, that's a great idea.
Wow.
So they built our first Drupal site a year after a year of contribution.
That's so interesting.
Yeah,
that's kind of fascinating.
So it's interesting because I had the same question Nick just asked, but mine was more from the hiring side, right? And team makeup side. So you said there are like, I don't know, I think you said there were like 4 kind of like product folks, right?
Well, no, 4 just non-engineers. So like myself, like I exclude myself from the engineering list, even though, I could write all the code I want, but my role is as a manager on the team.
Right.
And so there's, myself and Alex Bronstein, Fulgencia, who's another, very long-term Drupal contributor, long time. He's the other manager. Adam Balsam is the director of our department. And so the 3 of us are not, currently employed as engineers.
Sure.
And Gabor Hochi is the product manager. And he's also, he was the Drupal 6 release maintainer. Like he's the longest tenured Acquia, one of the oldest Drupal contributors I've ever met, like, longest in the project ever. So, but he's not employed as an engineer.
Right. Okay. So that actually helps to answer my question. So I was focusing more on team makeup, right? So, and then as far as hiring goes, like when you're hiring for new folks, like how many, like is a requirement like, hey, it would be great if they didn't know anything about Drupal or they were very new to Drupal, or is it, oh no, we need like a mid-level Drupal engineer to be able to kind of help build up those people that don't know? Like what's the mix there?
Yeah, I mean, the real answer is that it reflects Acquia's hiring practices at the time. Every time we've hired, we hire we're following the same practices. So the recent influx of recent graduates is a priority within Acquia of entry level hires, to grow the team that way. So we'll take the best engineers, or we'll take the best college grads and turn them into the best engineers. We'll take anybody, but as each time we've hired, the type of pool, the makeup of the pool we're hiring from has been different, but that's set by Acquia more than anything else.
Interesting.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that that's super interesting and great insight, right? As you said, like great insight to get those perspectives. And I imagine when you're going through a hiring process, you have the ability, like if you need a perspective, right? Yeah. You're like, oh, we're building project browser, right? Browser. Like let's see if we can get somebody from, I don't know, that has this specific skill set to come onto this team. Like that's a pretty interesting power to have, or ability to have, I guess.
I mean, it's been really fortuitous because Project Browser is if and when it gets added to core, will be the first decoupled framework built app within Drupal. And I mean, I'm a PHP developer originally, but the recent college grads know just as much JavaScript as they do anything else. So it was actually the perfect time to have a bunch of new people on the team that wanted to or had some experience with JavaScript to be able to throw them onto something like this, and not have them even have to know what a template PHP file was or what anything. Like they're not burdened by the history of Drupal development.
Oh man, I want to ask a JavaScript framework question now. So like, and I guess this is kind of related to hiring, right? So are you guys actively hiring more folks with JavaScript experience in a plan? So you talked about that 2 to 5 year plan, right? Like, are you hiring more folks with JavaScript experience in an effort or in a plan to say like, hey, in the next 2 to 5 years, like this is going to be a very big trend, not that it isn't already, that we need to be ready for?
I think I'm in the wrong place to answer that question.
That's a totally acceptable answer.
I wish I could say it was thought out that well from my perspective, but I've only been an engineering manager. Well, I've been an engineering manager for 2 years now. We've hired quite a few people, but really what happens is they say, you get to hire people. And I say, great. And I go and we do it. Like it's not, oh, now would be a good time to hire. Like I'm not involved in when they tell me I can hire people, we hire people. And so, I mean, with the way that the tech industry is going right now, the way that the financial markets are going right now, I don't know the next time I'll hire people, but the day they tell me I can, I'll be very excited about it.
Yeah, I really think that the focus you have on bringing folks in, new graduates that might not have any Drupal knowledge at all, and building their Drupal knowledge up, that's a huge need in the Drupal community across the board. Yeah. So lessons learned from your team would definitely help others do the same thing. So sharing that information here on this podcast is hopefully going to get some wheels turning. Hey, that's a great idea, and why don't we try doing that as well? Yeah. So thanks for that. And the second thing is, as one of the co-initiative leads for Project Browser, because our focus is on folks new to Drupal and site builders, having new people that don't really know Drupal help build it helps with that goal of making it useful for everybody, not just people with ingrained Drupal knowledge. So yeah, those two things I think really work well.
Yeah, I mean, it was great. Our team has been working on Project Browser since a year ago. And in this summer, we had a new hire join our team, and within 2 weeks of his thing, I think he opened like 7 issues in the Project Browser issue queue, being like, this is not how I expect a web app to work. And he was absolutely right. And every single part of it made it feel maybe a little less Drupal-y, but in a good way. And we're already, Project Browser is so new and different from the most of the regular Drupal admin UI. They were all incredible insights from someone who had just graduated and had never seen Drupal, but knew how the internet works.
Yeah, it helps to get that outside perspective, because you're at this point, I've been doing Drupal for almost 15 years. I'm used to all the Drupal isms. They feel normal to me, and it takes some outside perspective to sometimes question those assumptions.
Absolutely.
So speaking of that, how does the DAT determine what parts of the project it's going to work on? So you mentioned that it's shifted, aside from initiatives in general, but it's also shifted from core specific stuff to working on contrib and moving those things to core? Like who sets that? Who sets the roadmap for DAT?
Right. So when we were Octo, it was Dries, because we were the office of the CTO and he was the CTO. And he's also the project lead of Drupal. Now that we've shifted and I don't report directly to Dries in any way. We rely on the product managers within our company. So Gabor now, previously there was Matthew Grasmick, who wrote the original prototype for Project Browser. He was our product lead, and so the vision came directly from him. In consultation with the whole team, and with Dries. But whatever Acquia, we do things by quarter. We have quarterly goals and track our metrics and all that, internal stuff. And it's kind of hard to map the reality of Drupal onto that, because the release cycle of Drupal core has no acknowledgement of how quarters work. It doesn't fall nicely at all. And DrupalCon moves, for example, it's different quarters in different years. So it can be really hard to kind of map that onto a quarter system. But we have to come up with what we're going to work on, what impact we're going to have, and what we think is important to build next, and then we go and do it.
Yeah. So related to that, you mentioned that, I think you talked about this earlier, but do the priorities change when a new core version's around the corner, and how do they change?
Yeah, well, so and Nick, you referenced the semantic versioning thing earlier, like the minor releases. I'll start with minor releases first. We definitely, especially back a couple of years ago in the 8.3, 8.4 era, it was JSON API, media, and layout builder. And we just so happened to have teams working on the three big things happening in core at that time. And we ended up having to stagger them. Like, they didn't all go in at the exact same time because it's just a bottleneck of resources available.
Yep.
So we were able to work through all of those things, but we were trying to land three major features all in core at once. And so lately, instead, with, for example, CKEditor 5, it was much more. There are many advantages to developing that module as a contrib module with the intention that it would always go into core. Just the short reason is the test runs are faster. When you run a merge request or a patch against Drupal core, it takes about an hour on the test bot. If you run it in contrib, it's like 5 minutes. So just even that alone, that's a huge amount of time. But also the ability to, commit your own things. Like, we had a team of 6 people and 3 of them could commit. And it was always making sure we had some person able to commit, but you can always land things as opposed to going through the entire core or patch workflow to land every single iterative improvement. It allows us to work more iteratively. And so, with that's so for minor versions, we're always aiming to get something into the next minor version. So 10.1 is coming up in the summer. And, our hope is to get either automatic updates or Project Browser or both into it. And we'll see what happens. There's some infrastructure. I don't have to tell you, Leslie, but there's some upstream things that we are working on or waiting on. But, there's always attempts to try to land new features in the new minor versions. As far as major versions, I've only been on the team. Well, it's three releases now, 8, 9, and 10. There's definitely, we affectionately refer to it as Voltron. We kind of just abandon all the individual efforts that we've been working on and build one team to just do the things that are blocking the beta. As we talked about sort of pre-show, the beta release is our deadline for major things like this. Drupal 10.0 is coming out, or will be out by the time this podcast airs. But our team is, our main deadline was the beta deadline in September.
Okay.
And so when we definitely have a ramp up in advance of a new major release and kind of all hands on deck moments for that. But then as soon as the beta is over, we can go back to what we were previously working on.
Well, do you also help with some of getting contrib to the next version? Because there's always some lag time in modules being ready for the next version. Now, Drupal 9 was way better. Drupal 10 seems like it's even better than that. But do you also assist, for example, with the Vector bot or with the upgrade status module and just providing patches? Is that something that you guys do on your team too, or no?
That's a complicated answer to that question. The short answer is Gabor Hochi does a lot of that. I think he maintains the update status module. This comes back to the thing I was referring to earlier about the blurring between, my Drupal community responsibilities versus my Acquia responsibilities. And the short answer is that other than Gabor, no one on our team spends officially allocated time on contrib, like modules like that. But for example, Wim Leers maintains the CDN module, and he spent a day or two making sure it was ready. We all every module maintainer got the email saying, please update get your module ready. And we can take the time to work on that, during company time, but it's not a concentrated effort. Now, you can maybe 20 episodes from now, you can have another podcast with the Drupal integrations team, who is another engineering team at Acquia, who kind of stole our team name because they wanted to be the DIT to our DAT. But the Drupal integrations team is another engineering team at Acquia that has had a large effort towards module compatibility. Jacob Perry is the most community facing person on that team. And I think he was single-handedly responsible for 100 modules or so being ported. Wow. Or maybe less or maybe more. I don't know. Sorry, Jacob, or you're welcome, depending on how I exaggerated that. But so there are other efforts around that, but that's not something our team is focused on.
Interesting. So you name dropped earlier and said that you used to work for Dries, right? In your previous
acronym
incantation of your team. I'm wondering now these days, now that you're the DAT, how closely does Dries work with DAT team?
So that's an interesting question. That Dries, the product lead of Drupal, or the BDFL, versus Dries, the CTO of Acquia. He wears those two hats. I mean, he wears other hats, the board of the DA, etc. But at least those two. I talk to Drupal Dries, but I don't often interact with Acquia Dries. Gabor, who the most name dropped on this podcast so far, I believe, works, with Dries much more closely. And as I alluded to, Matthew Grasmick before him, like Dries is, works with the product managers to kind of set the direction of everything. The only other time I really, there are a lot of times that Dries will reach out to our team as subject matter experts. For things like some of his blog posts or Drupal Dries Note at DrupalCon, to kind of check in with us and whatnot. But as filtered through Gabor, he has, I'm sure, an important role. But as I said, most of our team's interactions with him would be as via Drupal side of things, not the Acquia side of things.
So there isn't an instance, and remember, this is like a totally safe space. Like Dries is never going to hear this, right? There's no instance where Dries goes like, "Hey Tim, this one thing is really bugging me. Can you go in and fix that?"
The last time he said that to me was, "We need layout builder in core." And we did it.
Oh, so they're
just minor things.
Little
things. Like this is, a do or die moment for Drupal, and we need to land this feature. Drupal will cease to exist. Please finish layout builder. And then we did it.
No pressure.
No,
but he hasn't done that to me in a while.
Items.
So and he was right. I mean, I think the more I talk to people about layout builder, the more I hear that people, it has been very impactful for Drupal. So can't say he was wrong.
It's great. Love it. Use it every day.
So, switching gears slightly, I'm curious about the team focus. Is the whole DAT team 100% focused on contribution? That focus, what they're contributing to in Drupal might change a little bit, but are they all focused on contribution, accelerating Drupal 100% of their time, or are they sometimes working on internal Acquia stuff or client billable stuff? Or is it like if you're on the DAT, you're working on the Drupal project somehow, some way?
I'll say, I think in our entire history, I believe there's 2 times ever that we wrote code that was not GPL and was not publicly available. One was a prototype that I don't even know what it did, and I didn't work on it, but I think it happened, so I'm going to count it. And the second one was the internal half of what we call the Acquia Migrate Accelerator, which was, is a UI to migrate Drupal 7 sites to D9 or D10. And the UI was like a JS app. I think it was probably in React. And the React code itself was just, closed repo. But the plumbing itself, every single part of the migrate experience was contributed back to Drupal, either core through migrate or migrate plus. And And then the majority of the work was vetting patches for hundreds of contrib modules. And if they didn't work, then writing those patches. And every single, there was, we had a massive JSON file of a patches file of like, here are all the patches you need for all of these modules in order for them to be vetted as good enough to run. And there was, the entire, for example, field collection to paragraphs migration was written by Acquia. The panelizer to layout builder, or all of those big migrations, not just the one-to-one one, like the the same module to the same module, but cross to a new contributed module. Those are some really big, tricky engineering problems that our team worked on, and every single line of that is either has been committed or is still in patch form publicly on D.O. But yeah, otherwise though, everything else we work on is either somewhere on GitHub as a prototype, or it's on D.O.
All right, so Tim, great things you've been talking about. Thanks for contributing everything back. The Drupal community definitely appreciates everything that the DAT team does. What is the team working on now? I know you mentioned the project browser and package manager automatic updates. So what else is your team working on now?
What else? That's not good enough. No,
yeah, that's great. I mean, yeah.
Well, the short answer is that's what we're working on right now. I mean, as over the summer was CKR 5 was our big engineering effort. Getting that was a incredible amount of work to do, and we had the right team to do it, and the support from CK Source and the rest of the community and the committers to do it. But it was a lot, and when that wrapped up, it was kind of focused on the finishing touches of D10. But then since then, it's been primarily auto updates and project browser, and then the last thing is there's don't know if you've talked about Next Drupal before, Next.js based Drupal. I know it,
mentioned.
I'm sure it was mentioned in the last episode as well. But so there's a, chapter 3 has the Next.js Drupal implementation, and then there's a Pantheon implementation of it. Now there's an Acquia implementation of it. And so that's another thing our team has been working on, is the sort of Next.js implementation for Acquia hosting. And so it's been pretty cool. I haven't been hands-on with it at all. It's been a small team, but that's the other thing we're working on in addition.
Great. And I can speak as one of the initiative leads that the help that the DAT team has given to Project Browser Initiative, and it's been incredible. So appreciate that, and I'm sure the Drupal community will benefit from all that work. So thanks.
So those two things that you're mainly focused on right now, definitely, I'm kind of in the same boat. They seem like they're probably one of the biggest priorities for the Drupal community. They're definitely one of the bigger things they'll help out going down the road. But I'm curious, as somebody who you probably spend a lot more time thinking about what Drupal as a project needs than I do, and many of our listeners. I'm curious if there's anything that you think is like on your radar that you're maybe not working on it yet, but you can't wait to jump into, or you think you'll need to be working on in the next year or two.
Yeah, I think there are a couple things, and I can give you some links to share in the doc notes later. There are a couple ideas. Well, let me pause and pivot to the ideas queue. I don't know if we've talked about this before, but the proposals for big things or new things or anything for Drupal core are handled in a separate issue queue from Drupal core issues, where there's bugs and features and whatnot, and it's in the ideas queue, and it's a project on Drupal.org called Ideas, and there's its own workflow of how things go from a proposed thing, and that's how ideas become initiatives. I know there are some really interesting things in there. Every time I feel kind of uninspired or just kind of like, today was the same day as yesterday, I go look at the ideas queue and kind of get excited about what's new and coming in Drupal. I think for me, the biggest thing is that Drupal is very good at many things. There are other things that we do as well that other things may or may not do better. And I think that we've always tried to expand Drupal's capabilities. I think it might be time to kind of circle back to making sure that the things we do best are actually the best in the world. So things like our content modeling, like data modeling in general. Our content type system is incredible. What you can do with view modes and the different field types, and it is fantastic. But I don't think we should rest on that too much. I think we shouldn't pay less attention to it just because it's good. Sometimes we need to pay extra attention to the things that are what we do well. So CKEditor 5 was a huge step forward for content authoring, but I think for content modeling is kind of the next thing I would like to get. See what's available out there.
Yeah, that's a good point, because you think about things like I just went through this exercise with a client, and you have to do this for most projects, but Drupal has a good system for image styles and presets and responsive images and stuff, but like, and it's really powerful, but like translating the needs of a project to what that is in Drupal is a huge part of any project. I mean, you have like, okay, I need to create like the ability to like create, first you have to create all the image presets, like these are the sizes we need. Then we need to map that to a responsive image preset and say, okay, at these breakpoints or whatever, use these ones. And then you need to assign that to a display mode sometimes, depending on, where it's being used, and then find a way to map that back to what file is actually uploaded. Like, okay, what do we need the person to upload in order to get this? And Drupal has a lot of flexibility and a lot of support and contribute for a lot of this stuff. But those are the types of problems that it's hard. It's hard as just a standalone contributor to kind of look at that system and be like, okay, here's where that user experience or developer experience could be improved. But I think the DAT is kind of in a place to be like, okay, we're going to dedicate some significant resources and thought and engineering power behind this kind of thing. And I'm not necessarily suggesting that that's the next thing you work on, but that's the kind of thing that I think you guys do that as a lone contributor in Drupal is a little bit more difficult to do.
You said a couple of things that I want to touch on. I think I'll go in reverse order. I don't want anyone to hear about this team and how many people we have on it and all the things we do and think that it devalues individual contribution at all, because there's so much more one person can get done than the team sometimes too, because you have to have discussions and meetings and planning and opinions, and then you end up with maybe something too generic and not opinionated enough. Like the ability to have a material effect on Drupal. I know this wasn't what you're saying, so I'm not trying to put words in it, but like the ability for one person to come in and have a huge effect on Drupal, or at least one specific area of it, is kind of what got me into Drupal in the first place and what keeps me here.
Absolutely.
So I don't want anyone to think, well, I'm not on a team of Drupal contributors, so then I shouldn't bother because they'll just do it. That's definitely not the case. Leslie's the project browser is a perfect example. Like Chris and Leslie, it's their initiative, and there are many other contributors who write just as much code. Like we have probably the most people thinking about it on a daily basis, but we're one part of the team of contributors and volunteers working on it, and we're only really focused. My team is really only focused on the code side. That's one half of what Project Browser's initiative is even about. Like the site builder side of things is just even more important probably, and just as much work. So all that said, I think there are places that I think that works the best when we are joining an effort and not taking on an effort. We collaborating with the community, or empowering one volunteer solo contributor to join a team of people. Because we hold everything in open channels and everything, all of the discussions, we're already a remote team. We're all over the world. We're already in all these different time zones, and we're, working on different things. Like it has felt seamless to work in Project Browser, and forget which people are Acquians and which aren't. Like you don't think about that. You just ping the people you need to talk to and you work with them. So I think that's been really great.
Yeah, I think one point to your previous point about like needing a team versus being an individual contributor, right? There are plenty of small to medium-sized issues that one person can like tackle on their own that like might not be an initiative, might not be on somebody's radar, might not require a team of 14 people to like collaborate on, right? And like that's definitely super important to make sure that those medium to smaller issues are getting done, and those kind of tasks for initiatives that are kind of, and not to be derogatory or negative, but like too small for a large team to work on, right? Like there's a lot of power there to be able to jump in and just get one thing done and be like, all right, it's done. and now it's in core, or it's in this module, or it's, you know, it's a contribution.
Yeah, that's actually something we've recently rediscovered for ourselves. I've mentioned a couple times we had a hackathon. We've kind of evolved it to is a hackathon model where we have one in November where we try to work as in groups, and really, as I mentioned, we have 3 different things we're working on. Try to cross things up so people get to know the other members of the team, because being distributed, you know, unrelated to global pandemics, like, you know, it's important to have cross work as much as possible. But then in the, you know, May-ish, June-ish, depending on when DrupalCons and release cycles are, we try to have a second sort of hackathon that it's really just a low-hanging fruit buster kind of thing. Like, go through the queues, find the issues that were like, hey, you know what? We got really close on that and it stalled out on X. Like, can we get this back moving again? And try to just go through all those like tantalizingly close things and close them up finally. And that feels the most to me like my previous to Acquia role within the community of just, you know, just going in and just working on as many things as possible just to help move them all forward, and then coming back the next week and doing the same thing. Like,
I just had a visual in my head of like Drupal Fruit Ninja, where like a bunch of Acquians are just going through and taking low hanging fruit and like slashing through it. Like,
yeah. Oh yeah, I remember that iOS game. It was a good game. But yes, that's exactly what it feels like, and it's like it's very satisfying to finish something. A lot of these initiatives we work on are multi-year things. You know, Layout Builder was almost 2 years long, and it can be a lot to work on one thing without something to show for it for that long. So it is always nice to have a nice little breather and say, hey, look, I got this done.
Yeah.
Great. Going back to something you talked about a few minutes ago, Tim, being the ideas queue. You know, do you take anything from there and actually work on any R&D tasks for Drupal, you know, that may become a future core initiative?
You know, there are a lot of people on my team with a lot of good ideas. I am probably the worst person at coming up with ideas ever. Like, I've never had an original idea in my life. Everything I've worked on in Drupal is someone else's idea that I was like, that's really cool. I want to help implement that. You know, I couldn't, but thankfully, I have very many coworkers who do not suffer from that and have really very many good ideas. And those are the kinds of things that, you know, we end up building. But no, I don't know that, you know, our team is very altruistically focused on what is best for Drupal. And as I said, the only time we've ever really worked on something that was even vaguely focused on Acquia really was the Migrate Accelerate, which was still really very much for the good of the Drupal community. Because, you know, if it's too hard to go from D7, I mean, it is hard to go from D7 to a modern version of Drupal. And it's so easy to go from D9 to D10, or even, you know, from most of later versions of D8 to D9, that like, we don't want people to get the wrong message or just stuck or get stuck on D7 or just go to something else. So to make that process better was a huge thing for Acquia, to get as many Drupal 7 sites to a modern version of Drupal, you know, as possible. And that's why all the stuff was released to the community. Like, every site should be off of Drupal 7 as fast as possible. Who cares who hosts it?
Absolutely. I mean, honestly, as a developer of Drupal sites, I would say probably, other than the 2 big ones that you're working on right now, I think automatic updates and Project Browser will be a huge boon. I mean, I think the gap that Project Browser closes is kind of getting the site builder back in. That's like a somewhat slightly advanced site builder, getting back into it, because like right now you have to learn Git, you have to learn Composer, you have to learn a CI pipeline. But if you can, once you close that gap, that's huge. But I think
absolutely
the other thing that really stands out to me as something that Drupal's missing when I look at other CMSs is theming. Like, Drupal has a super powerful theming system, and it's easy to spin up. Like, with the starter kits, it's super easy to spin up like a sub theme now, and or I guess it's not a sub theme. I don't know what you call it anymore. But starter kit is like a way to get a clean start. But that's a big barrier to entry for somebody. Like, you're kind of the theme ecosystem. Just there's no real easy plug and play modules that aren't like 1 or 2 or 3. Like, if you use one of the 2 or 3 plug and play modules, like, your site's going to look like every other site. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's funny. StarKit is something I forgot to mention that we worked on. I don't want to take away credit from anyone else because I don't know who else worked on it, but I know Lowry Escalif, who's on my team, was the chief architect and driver of the end of that work, and it's been huge, as you said, for themes.
I don't know how I missed it, but I just discovered it like 2 months ago. It was like, oh my god, this is so much better.
Yeah, it only landed in 2022.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I must have missed it too long because I converted I used Olivero as a base theme for a site, and I just spent so much time like overriding stuff, and then I discovered Starter Kit, and I rewrote that whole theme using Starter Kit in like 2 hours.
Yeah.
And I don't have to worry about overrides or breakages or all this the other config and stuff that I did need. So no, that's great. That was so fantastic.
Key. Yeah. I remember it being discussed at the last DrupalCon I was at in Seattle. But yeah, I think it landed. Oh no, it was honestly, that's the problem. Every year, I used to mark my Drupal years by which DrupalCon I was at that year, or which 2 DrupalCons I was at. And so, for those reasons, on top of every other reason, everything since 2020 has blurred together. So that landed in core in 2021 April. The Starter Kit theme,
the
Starter Kit theme itself, yeah. And
we need to mark it.
There was just further improvements made this past spring to allow it. I think it was more alpha back then, and now it's more more stable this past spring.
We need a marketing initiative as part of the DAT to get the news out there. I'm sure it was out there, and I just wasn't paying attention.
I mean, I think it begs the bigger question and something we talked about earlier, right? Like maybe there's a future for a JS theme for Drupal where like you don't necessarily have to use Drupal as a theming engine. You can kind of bring your own thing, or I don't know, maybe there's a specific JS framework theme for Drupal at some point.
Yeah,
but
it sounds like the Next.js and the Drupal state and JSON API and all that stuff is kind of slowly moving Drupal in that direction as well. But
so sad for you, Nick. I don't think Drupal theming is going to get any easier other than to switch to JavaScript.
Oh, no. I mean, I have to say, like, Drupal theming it's not that it's hard. It's that there's some things that are hard about it always. It's that you need to design something from the ground up if you have a moderately complex site and you don't want it to look like everything else. Like, if you're okay with, a completely accessible site out of the box with Olivero and just tweaking a couple colors, it's perfect. But if you're like a small business without a really large budget, getting a custom Drupal theme is a big ask. But for most of the clients that I work with, no, I mean, it's fine. It's standard fare. It's not a blocker for me or my projects.
You need to hire a professional
for that. Yeah, exactly.
And to be fair, in an agency setting, it's a huge time suck for projects is front end theming. But that's a conversation for a different day. Tim, let's move back to something you said kind of at the beginning of the show, right? So the team's doing planning 2 to 5 years into like the future, right? And you had already said that like maybe that's a little bit like above you, or like there are people on the team that are doing that. You're maybe not directly involved with that, but I'm kind of wondering, like, one, what is in the 2 to 5 year plan down the road? And two, other than the ideas queue that you just shared with us, is there any like long-term roadmap that somebody could look at?
I'll answer the easy last question first, which is no, there's no roadmap. Not that it's not public, it just doesn't exist. It's not written down anywhere. So within the product organization part of DAT at Acquia, there was an exercise we do every once in a while of write a press release dated 5 years from now, and what would it be talking about Drupal? And it was a really helpful exercise to kind of see like what kinds of things should we be talking about in 5 years, and then how do we work backwards from there? And that's been the exercise that we've used, and it doesn't really result in quite a roadmap per se. It's more just sort of like identifying the gaps, identifying what people will need or want, or what might be different, or what should we really not invest in because it could all change tomorrow. And so it's more just a framework for how we think about it. And so when I read our rather loftily worded mission statement, but it said we think 2 to 5 years ahead. It doesn't say we plan 2 to 5 years ahead.
Got it. So we won't see Drupal built on Bitcoin in the next 2 to 5 years.
I am the wrong guest to talk about that with.
That's fine. It was a poorly placed Bitcoin or cryptocurrency joke. Interesting. Okay, so but I will say the ideas queue that you shared, when you shared it, I kind of scrolled through it and was looking at some of the things. There's some absolute gold in there, which is very interesting. So, I think that's kind of a good indicator as to, or would you agree? Let me ask the question. Would you agree that that's a good indicator as to some of the things you may be working on in the future?
Yeah, I mean, like we're absolutely, we don't have a secret button. There's no back room. Like we participate in this the same way everyone else does. So, any of the good ideas we have are going to be in the ideas queue as well. Because as I said, we can't do it ourselves.
Right.
With all different shifting everythings from quarter to quarter, we need to have every initiative team should be comprised of people from all different parts of Drupal community. Different agencies, different hosting companies, different independent, volunteers. The more, the more different aspects there are, the better. If we have an initiative that's entirely made up of Acquians, it's going to be a bad time for everyone. And so, yeah, we absolutely have to participate in the same process as everything else. So yeah, the ideas queue is great. I mean, as I said, like I don't think of myself as someone who comes up with good ideas. And it's not something that I participate in that level, but I can read through and be like, that is a really good idea. I'm a connoisseur of good ideas, not a creative one. But there are many people, there have always been people in the Drupal community who are it's just really, I don't know how they do it, but they come up with it, or it feels prescient. They're looking ahead further than I could think. I'll give just a shout out, like Christine Chumias, who at Lullabot, C. Karina, who's been involved with Olivero and Claro and everything else. A couple of those ideas in there are hers. A couple of those ideas in there are things she's collaborated on, and she's someone I always pay attention to. Like, what is she thinking about? Sasha Eggenberger, Lowry Escalette, like there's those thinkers, and I'm glad they're here because we need those. We need everybody.
That's super interesting. So Tim, I just want to piggyback on something you just said. You mentioned, and we can go look at the marketplace on Drupal.org, and we can see that Acquia is like at the top of that list, right? And I imagine, in not based in any fact, that the Drupal acceleration team is probably a large factor in Acquia being towards the top of that list. You just mentioned about kind of distributing, like who's committing to core and who's working on some of these initiatives and issues like outside of Acquia, and that kind of being the power. I'm wondering, is Acquia actively working to try to distribute some of this stuff? And if they are, do you have any insight as to how they typically try to do that?
I guess, again, I'm going to harp back to the Acquia versus Acquians. Like, Acquia, the faceless entity, isn't doing anything about any of this. I mean, that, like,
right.
Acquians at Acquia care about these things, and Dries is an Acquia at Acquia, Acquian at Acquia. Like, but there's no top-down directive from the CEO or the board or anyone else about how we do that. I mean, we continue to be one of the top, if not the top, contributor by the marketplace rankings. But it's not always. Let me take a step back. There are many different ways to increase your company's ranking on that marketplace, and one of them is through code contributions. And I would wager that is a large part of why we're where we are. But there are other ways to contribute as well, and there are other companies that employ, contributors. I think if there are some people who are so prolific they can out contribute, teams of people. So I don't think that my earlier statement about how I personally think initiative teams should be built up of people from all different ways. That's my opinion. I think that's something, Gabor would, as the resident scholar on how initiatives work or have worked or haven't worked, would absolutely agree that any one viewpoint shouldn't be driving anything.
Right.
And but as I said, like with time zones, Project Browser has been great. We have people in all different time zones, and it's almost a continuous flow of development. Like we need someone well placed in like Alaska or Hawaii or something to keep it really 24/7. But otherwise, like we have really good coverage. And I remember working on views and some of the later things, especially with some of the people in previous Next, like we literally had 24-hour coverage on initiatives.
Wow.
And yeah, and then you can take a break. You can work on something else for a week. You can be sick. You can do all these things and not feel like you're burdening or disrupting or bottlenecking anyone else.
Yeah.
The more people, the better, basically.
Yeah. And as I asked that question and as I was listening to your answer, it dawned on me that it's not necessarily an Acquia thing to solve, right?
No.
It's definitely like, hey, community, like we need more, larger companies to potentially dedicate teams, but also, it's something that I think, the community could focus on a little bit to say like, hey, we're going to kind of try to distribute this work and kind of get that more global landscape involved if possible and where it makes the most sense.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, I'm very privileged and lucky to be at a company that pays for me to contribute 100% of the time.
Sure.
And this is the only company I've worked at that's done that, but there are others. And yeah, I think the hardest thing is I'm trying to envision myself 9 years ago contributing at the level I did, because all the views and core stuff was pre my time at Acquia. But still, it felt like there was a secret room, or there was an in club or whatever, in group, whatever you want to call it, that I was just kind of like working outside of that and getting stuff done in spite of not being in the in group. And then I joined what I thought was the in group and realized there isn't one. And I know that if I tell anyone that, they won't believe me until maybe you come work at Acquia and you find out there isn't one. And I mean, a part of that was I just, Angie Byron was is such an influence in my career, and my life in general. I just wanted to work wherever she worked. And I was really, grateful to be able to do that for so long until she moved on to and left Acquia. But yeah, there is no secret group. And I think, but that was the biggest thing for me, was that it was hard to envision being able to work in a silo or in a vacuum by myself at a company, even if I was funded, and be able to achieve the same level of contribution that if I'd been on a big team. But in hindsight, I think that's just incorrect. It's just about a confidence thing, or realizing that there is no back room, that you just have to do it in Drupal Slack like everyone else.
Well, I think that's a good segue into our next question before we close out, which is if somebody wants to get involved in, obviously, if it's one of the two main initiatives you're working on right now, you can go in the Drupal Slack Project Browser channel or project on Drupal.org. Same thing for automatic updates. But if they're looking just for more general integrate, working with the DAT team on something, where's the best place to do that, other than applying for a job there and getting a job there?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the funny thing is, even though to the rest of our company and to all of the community, to the community, we're still Octo, whatever. But like, even the rest of the company, they think of us as a monolith, as DAT. As I said, we have these like sub teams within them, the project browser and auto updates teams, etc. Like, I'm a manager, but like some of the engineers just don't talk to each other across those teams. They have no reason to, so they feel separate. So there are people in DAT more connected to other project browser volunteers than they are to their teammates within DAT. They're, the auto updates team, they spend more time talking to other auto updates volunteers, contributors, than they do talking to Acquia engineers. So the easiest way if you want to hang out with some DAT people, is just work on one of the things they're working on in public, because that's what they're doing. That's, as we talked about earlier, there's no other thing that we're spending our time on. Like it's all in that public sphere. But just in general, as far as jumping in, like every once in a while in the contribute channel in Drupal Slack, someone will just jump in and say, hey, I want to contribute and I don't know how. And then someone like inevitably will reply to them and start a thread and say, well, what do you know, or what are you interested in? And they're found a home. It's very, kind of async version of what happens at DrupalCon mentoring, where you walk into a room and it's kind of overwhelming and you just find a table and then someone comes over and helps you. And then by the end of the day, you've probably contributed to Drupal.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, Tim, we appreciate your time, and thank you for joining us again and discussing what it is that DAT does.
Yeah, glad to have been asked back. I know we almost talked about this in the project browser thing, and I'm glad we didn't overtake too much of that discussion. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
So for our listeners, do you have questions or feedback? You can reach out to Talking Drupal on Twitter with the handle Talking Drupal, or by email at show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
You can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/TD-promo.
You can get the Talking Drupal newsletter for show news, upcoming Drupal camps, local meetups, and much more. Sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
And thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and clicking the Become a Patron button. All right, we've made it to the end of our show. Tim, if folks wanted to get a hold of you to talk about all things Drupal, what's the best way for them to do that?
So you can find me on Mastodon or Twitter, Tim Plunkett, or Drupal Slack. Honestly, it's probably the best place. You could just drop me a line in there, and I'm happy to chat about Drupal.
There you go. Leslie, what about you?
You can find me at Leslie G on Drupal.org, or at Leslie Glynn on Twitter. And you can also find out if you want to help out with the Project Browser initiative, just join on the Project Browser channel on Drupal Slack.
Nick Laughlin, what about you?
At Nixman, pretty much everywhere, NICXVAN.
And I'm John Picozzi. You can find me on all the major social networks and Mastodon. Thank you for that reminder. At John Picozzi. And you can find out about EPAM at epam.com.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking. See you guys next week.
Have a good one, everyone.